Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Jackie Lynch. Jackie Lynch is a registered nutritional therapist and the author of The Happy Menopause, Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish in Notting Hill, London. Welcome, Jackie Lynch.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And Jackie Lynch, will you share with everyone your website?
Yes, absolutely. My clinic is called Well, Well, Well. So my website is well-well-well.co.uk.
Awesome. Now, today we're going to be talking about perimenopause and menopause and what you can do both during the stages of perimenopause and menopause to be healthy and happy naturally. So, Jackie Lynch, first of all, what is perimenopause?
Great question. The perimenopause is the premenopausal phase. For most women, it starts in their mid-40s and it runs through until you actually reach menopause. A lot of women don't actually realize that the menopause itself only lasts for one day. Technically, it's that day, 12 months after your last period. So you often don't even realize it unless you've been counting very closely. So actually, the perimenopause is where most of the fun and games is happening. All those symptoms that you often hear about associated with the menopause are usually happening in the run-up to the menopause. After the menopause, your body tends to readjust after a while. You find the new you and things settle down. So it's that period where things can start to change. And what's quite interesting is that you often get hit quite early on with symptoms that you might not expect.
Right. And Jackie Lynch, what are some common symptoms that women may go through during perimenopause?
Well, the early signs of perimenopause actually tend to be the emotional and the psychological symptoms. Because although I think many people think about hot flushes and then eventually a period stop and that's it, it's actually way more complicated than that. And as your hormones start to decline and well, during the perimenopause, to be honest, they're up and down like a yo-yo. And one of the key hormones in all of that is progesterone. And progesterone is the one that plays a big role in a lot of the emotional stuff. So many women during the perimenopause start to experience issues that have never happened to them before, perhaps mild anxiety, low mood, forgetfulness, poor concentration, brain fog. And it can be incredibly stressful because they often don't associate it with the menopause because they're still having regular periods and all they know about the menopause is that your periods stop and, well, I can't be menopausal because I still have periods. So it can be an incredibly stressful time where I've had people in my nutrition clinic say to me, I thought I had early onset Alzheimer's. I thought I was losing my mind. And actually, it was all about the hormones.
Right. And I'm currently 61 years old. And I remember when I was in perimenopause, I would get on the interstate 5 minutes from my house. And I've lived here for, over 20 years. I would get on the interstate 5 minutes from my house and get lost from places I go all the time. And I would get lost and not remember how to get off the exit. And I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah.
It was a very interesting time. So as you mentioned, some of the mental, emotional effects are some of the first things that we start to experience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be incredibly stressful because suddenly women find themselves behaving like their elderly relatives. They go upstairs and then can't remember what they came up for, or they can't find their keys anymore. And for professional women, it's particularly hard because if you've always been someone who's very confident and used to presenting to the board and lots of people, and suddenly you've got that loss of confidence because you're not sure you can trust your memory anymore, and you start to worry and think about what are younger colleagues thinking, it can be an incredibly stressful time.
Right. Now, what is menopause? And what's the average age of menopause? And is it different from the US and the UK? Because I believe
Oh,
I think in the US, the average age of menopause is age 51 or 52. So
ah, yeah, okay. I didn't realize that. It's considered to be age 51 here in the UK.
about
Um,
the same then.
so yeah, so as I said, it's that day, that specific day, 12 months after your period. So officially, after that, you're actually postmenopausal. Um, but of course, it's good to keep a close eye on that, because sometimes you might go 9 months without a period and think, "Yay, I'm finally through all the havoc," and then just towards the end, you get a little surprise, and then the clock starts ticking again.
Right. So menopause then is after you've gone 12 months without a period.
Absolutely. So what's going on during this phase is essentially the ovaries that have been producing our sex hormones, our estrogen, our progesterone, um, that production starts to decline as we become less fertile, and eventually the periods, although it may not always work like this for everyone, it didn't for me for sure, but technically, ultimately your periods will become lighter, further apart, and eventually stop. For some women, during that perimenopausal phase, it can be very much the opposite. The periods can get heavier, closer together. Women can often experience flooding, which again can be incredibly stressful and worrying. And eventually, trust me, you do get there, but it's not always the route that you might expect.
Yes. And some women go through menopause earlier than age 51. I've had clients as young as 40 go through menopause. I believe my mother was 42 when she went through menopause. I was 49 and a half when I
Right.
went through menopause. So how does the age varying, and some women also go through menopause later than 51. So what are
Yes,
some of the age
absolutely.
ranges that women can go through these phases?
Yeah, it is incredibly broad, and I think it's worth knowing that, because just as in the same way when we were young girls, and you might have been the last person in the class to start your periods and wondering when will they ever come, the range is very broad. So the average age is 51, but that means that some women go through it at about 56 or 7, others go through it much earlier. Now, anything sort of below the age of 45 is generally considered early menopause, but below the age of 40, it's what's called premature ovarian insufficiency, which is actually the theme of World Menopause Day this year. And that can be a terribly sad condition, because sometimes it can happen very early. It can happen to young girls in their teens, which of course means that they have to wave goodbye to all thoughts of having children at such a young age, which is incredibly sad. And they will usually need to have hormonal replacement therapy to bring them up and to support their health and underpin their health until they get to menopausal age, at which point obviously they can make their own choices about what they want to do from there.
Now, you mentioned that menopause itself is actually a day, but this is a transition.
Oh, it is.
It's
Oh
definitely
my, it is.
it's definitely a transition. And all my clients who are premenopausal, I'll tell them, I'll say, really work on your health now. Because if you think you're struggling with your weight or your mood or your energy, if you don't get this sorted now, when you go through menopause, it's going to be much, much harder.
Yeah,
So
that is so true.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this period of change that happens physiologically for women, how long does it take to go through these changes?
Well, it's a great question, and of course, it's different for every woman. But you've got to expect it to be years, not months. Essentially, a little bit like puberty is years, and any of the listeners who've got teenage children are probably desperately hoping it'll all be over soon, because the nightmare of puberty can go on for a long time. And it's almost the opposite of menopause, isn't it? It's that time when young people are going through that hormonal transition that helps them to become essentially a reproductive adult. Now, for us, it's very much the same. It's a lengthy process. And so, although technically the menopause might be one day, when we say menopause, we kind of mean a whole lot. So I think that on average, probably most women their perimenopause will last 3 to 5 years easily. It can be a lot longer. I mean, some women have, it can be a sort of lengthy 15-year period, but I don't want people listening to freak out, because that's unusual. For most women, it's probably 3 to 5 years, and it will be very up and down. I mean, probably about 20% of women will have very severe symptoms. About 20% will sail through it and barely notice it's happening. And then there'll be most of us somewhere in the middle who have our ups and our downs, and depending on how well we're looking after ourselves, those symptoms will be better or worse.
And menopause, that period, kind of after we've had our period end, how long does it take on average, Jackie Lynch, for women to balance out in your experience?
Oh, that again. Oh, such great questions. I think, again, it will vary. And my honest answer is that the better you've looked after yourself, the better your diet, the better your lifestyle, the more you're giving your body the tools to adjust more quickly so that it can take over and sort you out. Because let's not forget, the menopause is not a medical condition. Obviously, premature ovarian insufficiency is something that is unusual and different. But for most women, the menopause is a natural transition phase. And Mother Nature had a plan. I mean, she didn't abandon us to all these symptoms and think, well, off you go and deal with it. She had a backup plan. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we look after ourselves so that our body can actually apply that backup plan. Because what we're talking about here is the adrenal glands, which are two peanut-shaped glands that sit just above the kidneys. And their job post-menopause, once our ovaries stop producing all the sex hormones, is to produce a weak form of estrogen to keep us fit and healthy as we go through into sort of midlife and old age. But the big problem here is that the menopause, the adrenal glands also produce our stress hormones. And like it or not, midlife's a hugely stressful time for women. This is that I mentioned the puberty in the household. It can be the clash of hormones as puberty hits menopause. You've got probably more responsibility at work, more pressure at work, possibly looking after elderly relatives because we're in what's called the sandwich generation. And then as the reproductive hormones start to subside, for the first time for many years, you've got some headspace to stop automatically thinking about nurturing, which is what we're hardwired to do, and focus on yourself. So you might be asking yourself questions, am I in the right job? Am I in the right life? Am I in the right relationship? So there's lots of stress piling on. And the problem here is that the more stress there is, the more your adrenal glands will be very busy managing the stress response. Your estrogen won't even get a look in. So to answer your question, how long does it take for everything to settle down? It's really directly proportionate to how well you're able to manage your lifestyle so that you're not as stressed, and you're able to have the right nutrition that helps your body modulate its response to stress and manage it, so that you feel better equipped to cope with the challenges of daily life.
Now, one of my 10 books is called Unlimited Energy Now. And Unlimited Energy Now, which is available paperback, ebook, and audiobook, is all about what you can do to heal your adrenal glands. And it's my understanding that before menopause, your adrenal glands make 40% of the sex hormones, and after menopause, they make 90% of the sex hormones. Is that what your understanding is as well, Jackie?
Yeah, absolutely. They take over the job.
They took over the job. So if you go into perimenopause and menopause in a state of adrenal wipeout, you're going to have a much, much harder time. So yeah. I wrote Unlimited Energy Now because the number one condition I find in my new clients is actually fatigue. And when I'm doing medical intuitive readings, the first thing that I look at is a person's overall chi level, which is your life energy. And so having good chi is like having a fat bank account. When you have healthy adrenals and lots of energy, then, things can come along in your life and you can cope and you can handle it and you can manage. But if you're completely depleted, which I find many of my clients in the mid-40s are, as Jackie Lynch expressed, then you're going to have a much, much harder time. Now, Jackie Lynch, let's go back and talk about hormonally what's happening in our bodies in perimenopause, what's happening to the hormones, and what are some of the nutritional strategies that you found to help women balance their hormones in perimenopause?
Okay. Well, I think first of all, it's really all about getting back to basics, which I know sounds dull. And it's always very irritating when people say, well, you need to have a balanced diet. But here I am saying you need to have a balanced diet. Getting those basics right, because I do find it quite frustrating when you see health professionals talk about this on TV or in the media and saying, well, you can get everything you need from a balanced diet. I mean, sure you can, but it's actually really, really difficult to get a balanced diet when you're a busy person, you're struggling. I'm sure some of your meals are balanced, but then not all of them will be, because you're running around like a maniac half the time, probably looking after everyone else except yourself. So the first thing I'll say to my clients in my nutrition clinic is, you need to, this is your time. You've really now got to step back and focus on yourself, because if for no other reason that if you completely collapse, then everything else around you will collapse. So do it for the others, even if you won't do it for yourself. So in terms of what to do, the first thing I think, which is really nutrition 101 when it comes to stress management, is to balance that blood sugar. It's really simple, because every time your blood sugar drops, your body is pumping out more cortisol, more adrenaline, these stress hormones that will drive everything. They'll drive your food choices, they'll drive your brain, they'll drive everything. So I like to go back to basics and just have a good old look at that. And the simplest way to balance your blood sugar is to focus on two key nutrients. It's the complex carbohydrates, that's the fiber, which is, now carbs have a pretty bad rap, but we have to remember they're an enormous food group. And I think if I say one thing to your listeners, it really is that menopause is no time to be doing weird fad diets where you're excluding massive food groups. It's not the time to be doing that. You need all this stuff, and we need carbs, it's no exception. But that doesn't mean that you can have loads of cakes and cookies and refined sugar, because carbs is much broader than that. So park the refined sugar, park the starchy white carbs, because they're not going to really give you anything. And look at the carbs that actually have real nutrition in them. So I'm thinking about vegetables, fruits, whole grains like brown rice, whole grain breads, oats, pulses. All of these are great sources of fiber. Now, not only will that keep you going for longer, so have that blood sugar nicely balanced, but it's going to support your digestion. And your digestion is absolutely crucial to hormone balance. It supports what's going on in the liver, makes sure that your body's able to excrete those old hormones instead of having them reabsorb into the bloodstream and then cause havoc because you've got an imbalance, because it's all very finely balanced. So getting a decent amount of fiber with every meal is important. And then the silver bullet, I think, if ever there were a silver bullet for menopause, is probably protein. Because women don't eat enough of it. It drives me nuts. Men, no problem. They know they need their protein, and they're very good at making sure they get it. But, we're so busy having leafy greens and little bits of ribena with goodness knows what on it, and not thinking about getting the protein in. Now, protein's hard to digest. It slows down the release of that complex carbohydrate, keeps you going for longer. So what that means is if you have a combination of protein and fiber with every meal and snack, then your blood sugar will stay balanced, your stress hormones won't keep coming out, because trust me, you've probably already got quite enough stress in your life without your diet adding to it. So keeping that simple is really important, because if you think about that, and even if you don't listen to anything else I say for the rest of the show, get that right, it has all the other residual benefits, because you'll probably be eating more vegetables. So you'll be getting more of the vitamins and minerals that support your hormones in other ways. It'll support your digestion. It'll help with weight management, because if you're keeping your blood sugar nice and stable, then your hormones won't be driving those cravings for sugary foods and carbs that I'm sure are only too familiar to you. And most women in midlife, even the ones who've never had a weight problem, usually start to struggle with their weight at that time. So there's loads of residual benefits to balancing your blood sugar. But probably the single most important one is that it regulates those stress hormones and then gives your adrenals a bit of free time to crack on with producing estrogen.
I totally agree with absolutely everything you said. And we are in complete alignment. And I see my clients making some mistakes right now that really will wreck you mentally and physically. One of the big mistakes I see people making is intermittent fasting. And there's this belief that if you starve yourself for certain periods of the day, that you're going to control your weight and so on. so there's intermittent fasting, and however, if you're not eating till a certain, let's say you don't eat it till noon, and you wake up and you take your kids to school and you go to work and you're exercising, then as Jackie Lynch says, you're just pumping up your stress hormones. And when you understand that there's an inverse relationship between your cortisol and your thyroid hormones, the higher your stress hormones, the lower your thyroid function will be. And if you're on thyroid medication or have thyroid problems, I promise you that your stress hormones have been too high for too long. So intermittent fasting is a huge mistake. I did a medical intuitive reading about a week ago with a young woman who had not eaten at all for 3 days. And she was a complete wreck, close to a nervous breakdown. And it was just the absolute wrong message. And, she was told that if she controls her food, that she's going to be a more spiritual person. I'm like, well, what if you balance your blood sugar and you have the energy and the presence to deal with your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just nodding here all the time to all of that.
Yeah, we're in complete alignment. And the low carb diets are a complete nightmare. So one of the people that I studied with extensively is Dr. Diana Schwartzbein. I'm a Schwartzbein practitioner. And Dr. Schwartzbein talks about how you want to get at least 150 grams of carbohydrates every day, unless you have a damaged metabolism. And even then, 125 grams. If you're depressed, you need even more carbohydrates. Or if you're exercising heavily, you may need more carbohydrates. And I agree with Jackie Lynch. Just because you need carbs doesn't mean you eat bread and pasta and cookies and cakes. What about juicing? What about making smoothies with fruits and vegetables? What about sweet potatoes and brown rice? And berries, love our berries. High in antioxidants, right? And black beans that are loaded with antioxidants.
Yeah.
So any other, and I agree that we have to get enough protein. Another mistake that I see women making is being a vegetarian. Now, I taught yoga for 25 years. I'm a spiritual person. I pray and meditate every day. And however, some people cannot be healthy vegetarians. There's some body types that absolutely require meat in order to be healthy. And I've seen many very sick vegans and vegetarians. Of course, anyone can be very sick. That's for sure in our society. But Jackie Lynch, why is it so important, in your opinion, your professional opinion, to include meat in our diets as women during menopause and perimenopause?
Okay, that's a great question. See, I think there is a movement towards veganism, and I think a plant-based diet in lots of ways can be very healthy, providing you manage it. And it is hard work to have a really balanced vegan diet. You've got to work at it. But you're quite right, and I again, clinically, I see this. Some people respond better to animal protein. They absorb it better. So they might have the best breakfast in the world, which involves lots of protein in the form of flaxseed and chia seed, and even oats that contain quite a decent amount of protein. And they might add a nut butter to that as well. And technically, it contains tons of protein. And yet somehow they're not satisfied mid-morning when they might have a 3-egg omelette and actually feel completely different. Now, that's not the case for everyone, but I do see that there are definitely some people who really only respond better to animal protein. So you need to know your type, and if that's not you, then great. But if it is you, then you've got, self-care is so important during this time. So I think, first of all, understand your body and understand how you respond to things. But what I would also say is that one of the big things that can be a real issue during the perimenopause is anemia, a lack of iron. Now, even for women who've never been anemic in their life, things can change. If you're starting to get a lot of heavy periods, a lot of flooding, which may not have been the case before, that's happening for 2 or 3 years, then the chances are you're going to be depleted in iron. Now, iron comes in 2 forms. You have heme iron, which is found in animal sources, the meats, the fish, the eggs, and non-heme iron, which is found in plant sources. heme iron is much more easily absorbed by the body than non-heme iron. So particularly for those of you, and that's again many people in perimenopause who are having digestive issues, you know, if you've got IBS, irritable bowel, and you're struggling to absorb, then you need to get the most absorbable form of iron going. And it's also worth knowing is that heme iron, non-heme iron, the plant sources of iron, are more vulnerable to getting knocked out. So, for example, caffeine blocks the uptake of iron in the body, but actually it's the non-heme iron that it blocks. It won't block, you know, the steak or the eggs. That's so powerful and so easily absorbable, the body will still have it. So, you know, if you are persisting with a vegan diet, then that's fine. But then you need to be aware that if you want to get good levels of iron, you know, don't be having your cups of tea and coffee around your meal times, because that's really not going to help your cause. And then the other thing that's a huge factor, as again, I know you'll know this because you just mentioned the thyroid, is the role that iron plays in the cascade of hormones that convert to active thyroid hormone. So if you're low in iron again, then that's going to be triggering a whole load of thyroid symptoms. And what's quite interesting is that so many of the common menopause and perimenopausal symptoms, like, you know, fatigue, low mood, weight gain, and constipation, are also very classic of low thyroid, underactive thyroid. So making sure that you're getting plenty of good quality iron is going to be huge.
Yes. And if I have a client with thyroid problems, I'm going to ask that person to eat 5 to 6 small meals throughout the day to keep their blood sugar balanced, to maintain their cortisol from getting out of control, and to include red meat in their diet. Actually, a little bit every day, they'll actually feel better.
Mm.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And one thing that we haven't addressed is the role of mood and our brain chemistry, and how what we eat affects our brain chemistry. I'm always pointing out to my clients that your neurotransmitters, your brain chemicals, are made from amino acids. What are amino acids? They're the building blocks of protein. And here in the US, when I have clients who have clinical anxiety and depression, I actually encourage them to do lab tests on their amino acids. And many people are shocked to see exactly how depleted they are. Even people who've been eating meat, but especially long-term vegans and long-term vegetarians, you may be absolutely zapping your brain chemistry and thinking it's your life or your boss or your job or your partner or your kids. And maybe you're just not getting enough amino acids in your diet.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the building blocks of those neurotransmitters. So, you know, if you think about things like noradrenaline or dopamine, which are the arousal neurotransmitters, the ones that drive our motivation, our love of life, our libido, to be honest, as well. So if you're struggling with that, if you're suddenly struggling to have the motivation to get out of bed in the morning, if you're not in the mood anymore for any bedroom action, you know, are you getting enough protein? Because it could simply be that you're not providing your body the tools to make the neurotransmitters. And let's not forget that we're basically made of food. And if you don't give your body the tools, the building blocks to create all the cells and the hormones and the neurotransmitters in the correct way, then of course it's not going to work. Just like if you put the wrong kind of fuel in your car, it's just going to break down.
Yes, I've taught yoga for 25 years. And in yoga, we refer to the physical body as the Mana Myocastia, which is literally the body of food. And the better quality your food is, the better your hair, the better your bones, the better your muscles, the better your energy, the better your vitality.
Yeah, that's just so true. Do you know, you just mentioned hair, and I often use that as an example, because if women won't worry about anything else, they often worry about their hair. And most people know that hair is made of protein. So again, another great reason for eating protein. But I was recently talking to a dermatologist and a hair specialist, and she pointed out that actually, let's not forget the role of carbohydrate, because if you've got thinning hair, then your cells, the cells that produce from the hair follicles that produce your hair, will need carbohydrate for energy to start making more hair. And of course, if you're not having enough carbohydrate, then inevitably your body will prioritize your vital organs, and they'll send the carbohydrate that way because they don't want you to die. But it will have a very real and immediately noticeable effect on you and your hair. So, that's why losing these food groups is just not a smart move.
Yes, and I have two things to say about that. One, again, is I keep pointing out my age to show that you can be very healthy no matter what your age. I'm 61. I do not dye my hair. This is my real hair, untinted.
Amazing.
I do have some gray in it, you'll see. And I've helped many women over the years where their hair is falling out. And one of the first things that I do if a woman's hair is falling out is I look at their diet and make sure they're getting enough protein, and specifically meat. The other thing that's really helpful for hair is omega-3 fatty acids. So again, I mean, my hair is clean. I washed my hair, but this is what's possible without, I have a wonderful hairdresser, but this is what's possible with natural healing. Now, Jackie Lynch, the author of The Happy Menopause, Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish. So we talked about perimenopause, then we go into menopause. And this is when our hot flashes are going. And I remember when I first went into menopause, I bought a lot of shawls because I would be sitting there and all of a sudden I'd be really, really hot. And 10 minutes later, I'd be really, really cold, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting there. So I found shawls are really helpful because you could take them on and off.
Layering, definitely. It's all in the layering.
All in the layering. So what are some of the nutritional strategies that you find are really critical for us when we are in menopause?
Okay, so the sort of the next phase, once you've got started experiencing all those emotional symptoms, you'll get the more obvious things. Your periods will start going one way or another depending on you and often your family history. And of course the hot flushes and the night sweats can start. So first of all, Nutrition 101 still applies. Balance that blood sugar. Let your adrenal glands have the space to produce the estrogen you need, because although we're not entirely sure of the exact mechanism that creates the hot flushes, we do know it's related to that drop in estrogen. So making sure that you're just getting those basics right. But then you need to drive down a little bit harder. And probably what I'm going to say here is not so popular, so apologies in advance, but it's also about what you're not having. So this is the time to look hard at your alcohol consumption, because honestly, alcohol is such a killer when it comes to hot flushes and sleep disruption. And I don't mean binge drinking, although if you are binge drinking, please stop. It's just as much of an issue if you're having a civilized glass of wine every day, your meal, which you might think, well, I've read somewhere that's good for my heart and it's all fabulous. But if you're getting hot flushes, then that glass of wine every day is not helping your cause. So just stop it. See what happens. Honestly, trust me, you'll see a huge difference. Because alcohol generally is a killer for hot flushes, but wine in particular, and I think red wine really is a strong trigger. So if that sounds like too much, then start slowly. Give yourself maybe 3 consecutive alcohol-free days each week. That's what I often recommend to clients, because during that time, consecutive is important. It gives your liver time to do loads of its other jobs, because it's got hundreds of jobs, not just detoxing the stuff that we shove in ourselves. So one of its many jobs is, of course, hormone balance. So processing, metabolizing old hormones, really important. So if you give it 3 days to catch up, it's a little bit like you switching off your inbox for a while so that you don't have your mailbox constantly filling up, so you're only dealing with the latest thing that's come in through the email. This means you can go back and catch up, and that's what your liver can do. So that consecutive support's really helpful. And I can promise you now, I'm not into betting, but I'd probably still bet money on it. You'll feel very different in those 3 days. Certainly your sleep will be much better. And then you'll probably be motivated to extend it to the rest of the week. Sometimes we do need a little bit of motivation to change what might be ingrained habits. So I'm not saying you can't ever have a drink again, but have a good hard look at your alcohol habits if you're struggling with hot flushes. And then the other biggie in all of that, of course, is caffeine. very similar. It's a powerful stimulant. It triggers a lot of stuff in the body. And again, you might think, well, it can't be that because I've had coffee for years and I've been fine. It's like, yeah, but you haven't been menopausal for years. This is a whole different ball game. Your body's responding to things in a way that it didn't before. So don't make assumptions on how things were in your 20s and 30s because you're a different woman now.
Yes, and if I've got a client drinking lots of coffee, I'll say switch over to green tea because it has caffeine in it, but it's metabolized totally differently. Now let's go back to what you were talking about, Jackie Lynch, with alcohol and sleep, because it's so critical during perimenopause and menopause that we get sleep, and yet when our hormones are fluctuating, that can affect your sleep. How does alcohol affect our sleep? And what do we need to do differently to sleep better during this?
Okay. Well, it affects us in loads of different ways. I mean, first of all, alcohol is a sedative. So although you might think that a little nightcap at night helps you get off to sleep, and yeah, it probably does, but it's not sleep as we know it. It is not the restorative sleep, because let's remember that sleep is not just about rest. Sleep is a very restorative phase for the body, particularly those 4 golden hours that tend to happen between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., where the restorative, the rebuilding of our cells, the detoxing of our brain, and the removal of proteins that have built up over the course of the day that can affect our mental health, both short-term and long-term. But lots of stuff's going on while we're asleep. But if you put yourself to sleep with alcohol, then that's sedation. So it's not the same restorative process. So first of all, you'll probably wake up feeling jaded and unrefreshed the next day, even if you slept for 7 hours. So it's going to affect the quality of your sleep. It prolongs what's called REM, the rapid eye movement period of sleep, which is the time when we dream. Now, normally that should only represent about 20 minutes of each 90-minute sleep cycle. But when it gets extended, of course, your sleep's going to be more active, more disruptive. That's when people sometimes talk in their sleep during that period. So you don't want that period extended because it's not helpful. What else does alcohol do? Well, of course, it massively disrupts your blood sugar. You're sitting down enjoying a great movie at night and getting through the best part of a bottle of wine with chocolate and goodness knows what, then you're going to go to bed with your blood sugar high. And of course, what will happen? Insulin will kick in, the blood sugar will drop, probably about 2 or 3 a.m., depending on how much you've been packing away. Bing, you'll be wide awake, not entirely sure why, because it wasn't a hot flush this time. That'll be the cortisol saying, wake up, wake up. It wants to generate the fight or flight response. So it's going to massively disrupt your blood sugar at a time when you want it nice and steady so that you can get through the night. And it's worth knowing that alcohol, it takes our body an hour to process each unit of alcohol. And I don't know if you've looked at your units lately, but you know, it's you don't have to drink very much to get quite a lot of units. So a single gin and tonic, for example, if you've got a measure, then you'll know that at home, but you probably just pour a good wristful. A single measure, it's tiny. You can barely see it in the glass. That's already 1 unit of alcohol. And with the wines, that's changed a lot over the years. And I know, Catherine, you'll have views on this, because I remember in a former life, before I became a nutritionist, I lived in France, and the wine there was much lower alcohol. It was sort of 10, 11, perhaps 12%. For the most part. But then over sort of the 80s and the 90s, a lot of the New World wines came in, or much stronger. And so you started getting wines that were 15 or 16%. Lovely, strong, full-bodied wines. But of course, because they had a stronger percentage of alcohol, the units are more. So, a glass of wine can contain about 3 units. The average bottle between 9 and 12 or 13 units, depending on the strength. So you can pack away a lot of units. And if you have 3 or 4 units of wine in the evening, then it's going to take 4 hours for your body to process that. And then, of course, you'll probably wake up because your body's processed it, and now it wants to know what's next, because again, your blood sugar's crashed. So it's massively disruptive to sleep.
Really fabulous information, Jackie Lynch. Now, many women during perimenopause and menopause, as you know, struggle with their weight. And I know that even when I went into menopause, I went up 1 jean size. I don't weigh myself, but I'm a small person. No one feel sorry for you when you're small, but I went up 1 jean size, but then I just kept maintaining my healthy lifestyle and it all normalized and I went back to the way that I was. But what are your top suggestions for women in perimenopause and menopause who find themselves struggling with their weight?
Okay, great question. And it's a time when the sisterhood finally comes together, because even the women who've never had to worry about their weight suddenly find this little extra band, a little friend around the middle that wasn't there before. And of course, the women who've always struggled with their weight suddenly find that the tried and tested methods of the past simply won't work, because your metabolism is in a whole new place. So where a crash diet might have worked before, it's not going to work now. Because once again, that will trigger the stress hormones. Stress hormones take over. What they'll want to do is store that food rather than processing it as energy, and it'll store it right around the middle. Again, partly because that's nice and close to the liver, so it can be converted back quickly to generate energy for the fight or flight response, but also because the fat around the middle has its own hormonal profile. And of course, it can contain estrogen. Fat cells will contain estrogen. So that's kind of the body's plan C. If your ovaries aren't producing estrogen and you're not allowing your adrenals to do that, well, do you know what? It's going to hang on to the fat cells and do it for you. So first of all, it's going back once again to my nutrition 101. Balance that blood sugar. Take a hard look at your diet, because we do get into habits. Even if you think you've got a good diet, has it slipped a bit? Honestly, come on. Look yourself in the mirror and think, keep a food diary for a week or two, because it's very boring to do, but it's an incredibly useful exercise, because you're about to have a little snack and then you remember you've got to note it down, and then you think, God, I wouldn't have remembered I'd had that snack otherwise, and actually now I'm not going to have it because I realize I don't need it. So it can often act as a preemptive strike as well, but also it can just show you the habits that you might have picked up. Do you nibble on stuff while you're cooking? If you're still cooking for your family, if they're a younger family, and then you eat later, are you sort of eating bits off their plates? What do you do? Are you actually having a careful diet, or is there quite a lot going on that you haven't noticed? I think this is the time to really think about your portions as well. So take another good look at your plate. I always think that protein should be a good quarter of the meal at lunch and dinner, so a good fist size. If you're having starchy carbs like brown rice or sweet potato, then again, that's a fist size. And that's not very big. Most women don't have massive fists. And then it's going to be 2 fists of different types of vegetables. And then if you don't want to be having starch in the evening meal, because that's quite a quick and easy way. If you have starch at lunchtime, that's probably sufficient if you have a fairly sedentary life. Then you could have 3 fistfuls of vegetables and lose the starch in the evening meal, because if you're basically sitting around for the rest of the day, you probably don't need starch in the evening. So that will depend. I mean, recently I was working with a lady who was a nurse, and she was on her feet all the time, and I realized I had to readjust my thoughts about how much starchy carbohydrate was relevant for her, so that she didn't basically collapse. But probably for most of us, we don't need quite so much in the evenings. So I think about that. And then the other big one is to start eating mindfully, because we're still running around like maniacs. Don't tell me that you're not running around at breakfast time, probably sort of eating as you try and get yourself and your family ready. So your body, again, as you're chewing your food, well, you're probably not chewing, and that's the point. Because as we chew our food, the saliva releases enzymes, not only that digest the food, but also that activate the satiety response that lets us know when we're full. So, of course, if you don't activate that response because you're constantly eating on the go, then you just keep eating. So I think a lot of it will come down to looking at the portions in a way that you might not have had to before. So don't eat standing up. Always make time to sit down, have a look at your meal. Don't do it in front of your laptop at work. Don't do it while you're on the phone. Savor your food and then eat slowly. Challenge yourself to be the last to finish, because you'll probably find you won't even need to finish the plate, because actually you're full well before.
Those are really fabulous strategies. So Jackie Lynch, the registered nutritional therapist and author of The Happy Menopause, Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish. Any final thoughts for our audience about how we can sail through perimenopause and menopause easily with nutrition, good nutrition?
Okay. Well, I haven't mentioned my favorite thing yet, so I've got to mention that. which is magnesium. I'm a big fan of magnesium. I think it's every menopausal woman's best friend. You know, if it were a woman, it would be a very busy woman, because magnesium's got about, at least 300 different jobs to do in the body. But some of the really crucial ones are that it helps to calm the nervous system. It regulates the body's response to stress. So if you're feeling like you're clinging on by your fingertips and only just coping on sheer willpower as you go through the day, then you're probably low in magnesium. Now, magnesium also plays a key role in energy production. Of course, this will be all over your book, I'm sure. It's like a ignition key. So if you don't have magnesium, all the chain reaction of energy production can't even get started. So it's like, you've forgotten your car keys and the car isn't going anywhere. What else does it do? It supports and relaxes muscles. So if you've got tired, aching muscles, then maybe having something like an Epsom salt bath, where you have 2 or 3 handfuls of salts, which are magnesium sulfate basically, that absorbs through the skin. It'll calm your nervous system, set you up for a great night's sleep, but also relax those muscles. And those of you who are, doing a lot of sport, a lot of intense exercise, again, it can be great for muscle recovery. And even simple things like that twitchy eyelid that people often get is a classic sign of magnesium deficiency. So two good handfuls of leafy green vegetables every day, they're a brilliant source of magnesium. And they're a bit of a one-stop shop for menopausal women anyway, because they also contain about twice as much calcium per 100 grams as milk. They are a good source of iron. They're a fantastic source of vitamin C. So there's just all these things coming together that are really, really supportive of us. So I think, get magnesium in your diet.
Absolutely fabulous information from Jackie Lynch, and you can read her book, The Happy Menopause, Smart Nutrition to Help You Flourish. She is a registered nutritional therapist in Notting Hill. This is Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer, Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can help yourself naturally. And remember, when you take great care to eat well, you can sail through perimenopause and menopause much more easily. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.